My former boss claimed I stole client data, but the investigator recognized me from the cybersecurity workshops I give to nonprofits. The FBI agent sat across from me with a folder thick enough to end my life. Mr. Hayes, we have evidence that you accessed Stratford Financial's client database and transferred sensitive information to an offshore server. 800,000 client records, social security numbers, account details, investment portfolios. My coffee went cold in my hand. I'd been having breakfast at my apartment when they knocked. Now I sat in an interrogation room downtown watching my world collapse. I didn't do that, I said. I haven't worked at Stratford in 3 weeks. The agent, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a wedding ring, opened the folder. Your former employer, Leonard Voss, filed a report yesterday. He discovered the breach during a routine security audit. The logs show your credentials were used to access restricted files on October 15th at 11:38 p.m. October 15th. 3 weeks ago, my last day at Stratford Financial. I'd turned in my badge, my laptop, my access cards. I'd walked out of that building swearing I'd never look back. My credentials were deactivated when I left, I said. IT confirmed it. The agent slid a printed log across the table. My username, my password hash. Access granted to the client database. File transfers totaling 4.2 gigabytes, all time-stamped after I'd officially departed the company. This doesn't make sense, I said. Why would I steal data after quitting? What would I even do with it? The agent's expression didn't change. Mr. Voss claims you were terminated for cause, that you made threats when confronted about performance issues. My hands clenched. That's a lie. I resigned. I have the resignation letter. She made a note. We'll need to see that. We'll also need access to your personal computers, your phone, your cloud storage accounts. If you cooperate fully, that helps your case. I thought about my laptop at home, my phone in my pocket. Nothing incriminating because I hadn't done anything. But that's what innocent people always think before their lives get destroyed by evidence they can't explain. I want a lawyer, I said. The agent nodded. That's your right. But Mr. Hayes, I should tell you, this is a federal case. Data theft, wire fraud, identity theft. We're looking at 20 years minimum if convicted. 20 years. I was 31 years old. I'd spent the last decade building a career in cybersecurity. I'd worked for 3 companies, earned certifications, built a reputation. And now Leonard Voss, the man who'd made my last 6 months at Stratford Financial a waking nightmare, was claiming I'd committed a crime that could end everything. The agent stood. Don't leave the city. We'll be in touch. I walked out of the federal building into bright October sunshine that felt wrong. My phone buzzed. Text from my sister. Are you okay? Someone came to my work asking about you. They were already investigating my family. I called Diana, my girlfriend of 2 years. She answered on the first ring. Austin? Where are you? 2 FBI agents just left my office. Her voice was shaking. They asked if you'd seemed stressed, if you'd mentioned money problems. What's happening? I told her everything. The interrogation, the accusations, Leonard's lies. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, silence stretched between us. Diana? I said. Her voice came back different. Did you do it? The question hit harder than any accusation. No, I said. I didn't do anything. Another pause. But they have evidence. They showed me logs. She didn't believe me, or she didn't know what to believe. I could hear it in her voice. I need to go, she said. I have a meeting. She hung up. I stood on the sidewalk watching traffic flow past and felt the first real taste of what was coming. Nobody would believe me. The evidence was too clean. Leonard had planned this perfectly. I drove to a lawyer's office I'd found on Google. David Huang, criminal defense. His secretary fit me in for an emergency consultation. I sat in a conference room with bad art on the walls and told my story for the 2nd time that day. David listened, took notes, looked grave. How much can you afford for legal defense? He asked. I thought about my savings. $30,000 I'd been planning to use for a down payment on a house. $30,000. David's expression said it wasn't enough. Federal cases are expensive. Discovery alone could cost $50,000. Trial, if it goes that far, could run 200,000 or more. I felt sick. I don't have that. David closed his folder. There are public defenders, but they're overworked. You'd be one of dozens of cases. I'm being honest with you, this is serious. The evidence your former employer has provided appears substantial. Without significant resources to challenge it, you're at a disadvantage. I left his office with a business card and no representation. At home, I opened my laptop and started searching. Leonard Voss had been my boss for 18 months. Senior Vice President of Client Services at Stratford Financial, a wealth management firm handling investments for high-net-worth individuals. I'd been brought on as a security analyst, tasked with protecting client data and preventing breaches. I'd been good at my job. Too good, maybe. 6 months ago, I'd discovered something. A pattern in the system logs. Client accounts being accessed outside normal business hours. Small amounts of information being copied. Nothing massive, nothing that triggered alarms, but enough to notice if you knew where to look. I'd reported it to Leonard. He'd thanked me, said he'd investigate, told me not to mention it to anyone else. 2 weeks later, the pattern stopped. I assumed he'd handled it. Then the problems started. Leonard began criticizing my work, missed deadlines I'd met, errors in reports I'd written correctly. He scheduled performance reviews, documented conversations, built a file. I'd been confused at first. Then I realized what was happening. He was building a case to fire me. I started documenting everything, saved emails, recorded meetings on my phone, built my own paper trail. When Leonard called me into his office on September 23rd and told me my performance was unacceptable, I had 6 months of evidence showing otherwise. I'd resigned instead of letting him fire me, walked out on my terms. I thought I'd won. Now I understood. Leonard hadn't been building a case to fire me. He'd been building a case to frame me. The data breach I discovered 6 months ago hadn't stopped. It had continued. And when it inevitably came to light, Leonard needed someone to blame. Someone who'd had access, who'd raised concerns about security, who'd left under contentious circumstances. Me. I spent the next week trying to prove my innocence. I hired a cheap lawyer from Craigslist who specialized in DUI cases. He took my $15,000 and filed motions that went nowhere. The FBI executed a search warrant on my apartment. They took my laptop, my backup drives, my phone. I watched agents photograph my desk, bag my electronics, turn my life into evidence. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. Leonard's logs showed my credentials accessing the database. Without my devices showing corresponding activity, the prosecution would argue I'd used a burner laptop or accessed the data from somewhere else. The media picked up the story in November. Former Stratford Financial employee accused of massive data breach. My name, my photo, my entire history spread across local news. The article described me as a disgruntled former employee who'd stolen client information for financial gain. Leonard Voss was quoted extensively. We trusted Austin Hayes with our most sensitive data. This betrayal affects hundreds of families who relied on our discretion and security. I stopped leaving my apartment. Groceries delivered, curtains drawn, phone silenced. Diana stopped returning my calls. My sister visited once, brought food, didn't stay long. Friends vanished. Former colleagues blocked me on social media. The cybersecurity workshops I'd been running for nonprofits called and canceled my upcoming sessions. I'd started those workshops 3 years ago. Free training for nonprofit organizations that couldn't afford professional security consulting. I taught them about password management, phishing prevention, data encryption. I'd worked with homeless shelters, food banks, youth programs, women's shelters. 23 organizations over 3 years. Hundreds of people trained. All of it meant nothing now. In December, the FBI called me in for a second interview. A different agent this time. She introduced herself as Special Agent Monica Reeves. She was younger than the first agent, maybe late 30s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. She'd taken over the case from her colleague who'd retired. We sat in the same interrogation room. She spread photos across the table, screenshots of the stolen data appearing on dark web forums, client information being sold, identity theft cases emerging. This is the damage you've caused, she said. Real people losing money, having their identities stolen. Some of them are elderly. Some are families who trusted Stratford with their retirement savings. I stared at the photos. I didn't do this. Agent Reeves leaned back. Austin Hayes, 31 years old. Degree in computer science from State University. Worked at 3 companies in 10 years. Resigned from Stratford Financial on September 23rd. No criminal record. No debt. No obvious motive. She paused. That's what doesn't make sense to me. Why would someone with your background throw it all away for data that's difficult to monetize? It was the first time anyone had asked that question. I wouldn't, I said. That's what I've been trying to tell everyone. Agent Reeves studied me. You look familiar. Have we met before? My heart jumped. I don't think so. She tilted her head, thinking. Then her eyes widened. The cybersecurity workshops. The non-profit in Riverside. You taught our staff about email security? I remembered. 8 months ago. A women's shelter that served domestic violence survivors. Agent Reeves had been there in civilian clothes, listening intently. You volunteer there? I said. She nodded. My sister stayed there 5 years ago. They saved her life. When I heard they were getting free security training, I wanted to see who was teaching it. The room felt different suddenly, smaller, more human. You taught us how to spot phishing attempts, Agent Reeves said. How to protect client data. You spent 3 hours after the official session helping our director set up encrypted email. I remembered that too. The director had been worried about abusive partners trying to track clients through technology. I'd stayed until 9 p.m. making sure their systems were secure. Someone who steals client data doesn't spend their free time teaching nonprofits how to protect data, Agent Reeves said. That's what's been bothering me about this case. I felt something crack open in my chest. Hope. Dangerous hope. Leonard Voss is lying, I said. 6 months ago, I found evidence of a data breach at Stratford. I reported it to him. 2 weeks later, he started building a case against me. Agent Reeves pulled out her notebook. Tell me everything. I talked for 2 hours, showed her the emails I'd saved, the recordings I'd made, the timeline I'd built. She listened, took notes, asked sharp questions. When I finished, she sat back. Why didn't you tell the first agent this? I laughed bitterly. I tried. She wasn't interested in alternative theories. Agent Reeves closed her notebook. I'm going to look into Leonard Voss. If what you're saying is true, he's committed multiple federal crimes. But I need you to understand. The evidence against you is still substantial. Unless I can prove those logs were fabricated or your credentials were compromised, the case stands. She stood to leave. Don't talk to anyone about this conversation. And Austin? Keep your phone on. She left. I sat in that interrogation room alone and cried for the first time since this started. Someone believed me. Someone was looking. It wasn't over. I went home and waited. Days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks. January arrived cold and bleak. My cheap lawyer called and said the prosecutor was offering a plea deal. Plead guilty to reduce charges, serve 5 years, pay restitution. He recommended I take it. You're not going to win at trial, he said. The evidence is too strong. I fired him. Spent my last $1,000 on filing fees to represent myself. Started learning federal criminal procedure from library books and legal websites. I was going to trial. I was going to lose. But I wouldn't plead guilty to something I didn't do. Agent Reeves called on January 18th. I need you to come to the field office. Bring any documentation you have about your time at Stratford. I arrived with 3 folders. She met me in a conference room with another agent and a federal prosecutor. On the table were documents I'd never seen. Bank records, corporate filings, email threads. We've been investigating Leonard Voss, Agent Reeves said. What we found is extensive. She spread out the evidence. Leonard had been selling client data for 2 years. Small batches, carefully timed, never enough to trigger alarms. He'd set up shell companies to receive payments. He'd falsified security reports to hide the breaches. He'd made $3.7 million. The breach you discovered 6 months ago was Leonard accessing the database, Agent Reeves said. When you reported it, he realized he needed to stop temporarily. But he'd also realized you were a threat. Someone who paid attention, someone who might discover the full scope of his operation. The prosecutor spoke up. He spent 6 months building a case to frame you. When you resigned instead of being fired, he accelerated his timeline. He created fake logs showing your credentials accessing the database after you left. I stared at the evidence. How did you prove the logs were fake? Agent Reeves smiled. I didn't. Leonard proved it himself. We executed a search warrant on his home last week. Found the laptop he used to fabricate the access logs. He'd kept it as insurance in case he needed to modify the evidence later. She slid another document across. We also found communication with a buyer. Leonard had sold the client data to a criminal organization 2 days before he reported you to us. He needed someone to take the fall before the breach was discovered through other channels. Everything made sense now. The timing, the accusations, the perfect evidence that was too perfect. The charges against you are being dropped, the prosecutor said. We're filing charges against Leonard Voss. Multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, computer fraud, obstruction of justice. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. I should have felt relief. Victory. Instead, I felt hollow. My life is destroyed, I said. My reputation, my career, my relationship. Everyone thinks I'm guilty. Agent Reeves nodded. We're going to release a statement. Clear your name publicly. But you're right. Some damage can't be undone. I walked out of that building into January cold. The charges were dropped. My name was cleared. Local news ran stories about the real criminal, about Leonard Voss's arrest, about the innocent man falsely accused. Some people apologized. Most didn't. Diana called, said she was sorry for doubting me, asked if we could try again. I told her no. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal clean. My sister brought flowers and tears. We sat in my apartment and didn't talk about the months she'd pulled away. The nonprofits called back, apologized for canceling my workshops, asked if I'd return. I thought about it for a long time. The damage Leonard had caused went beyond me. The client data he'd sold had ruined lives. Elderly people losing their savings, families dealing with identity theft. The ripples spread wide. But I could do something about the future. I could teach people to protect themselves. I could help organizations build better security. I could make the world slightly less vulnerable to people like Leonard Voss. I restarted the workshops in March, showed up at a food bank in Riverside and taught their staff about data protection. 15 people attended. Agent Reeves was there, in the back row, taking notes. Afterward, she approached me. My sister wants to thank you personally. The shelter kept her information secure because of what you taught them. Her ex never found her. We got coffee, talked about the case, about justice, about what happens after. She told me Leonard had pleaded guilty to avoid trial. 43 years in federal prison. He'd be 82 when released. Does it feel like justice? She asked. I thought about the question. It feels like consequences, which is close. I applied for jobs in cybersecurity. Most companies Googled my name and saw the accusations before they saw the exoneration. I got rejected 38 times. A small nonprofit finally hired me, half my previous salary. But the work mattered. Protecting vulnerable populations, making sure their data stayed secure, making sure nobody else experienced what Stratford's clients had experienced. I started writing about my experience, posted articles about corporate fraud, about false accusations, about the presumption of guilt in the digital age. Some people read them. Some people reached out with their own stories. Patterns emerged. Executives framing employees. Companies covering up breaches by blaming convenient scapegoats. The system protecting power while crushing the vulnerable. I realized I couldn't just teach security. I had to teach people how to protect themselves from internal threats, how to document everything, how to recognize when they're being set up, how to survive when the system turns against them. A year after the charges were dropped, I spoke at a cybersecurity conference, told my story to 300 professionals, explained how Leonard had framed me, how evidence can be manufactured, how innocent people need to think like the guilty to protect themselves. The applause felt strange. I wasn't a hero. I was someone who'd survived through luck, and one agent who'd cared enough to look deeper. Agent Reeves attended the conference. We had dinner afterward. She told me she'd been promoted, was now leading the FBI's corporate fraud division. Your case taught me something, she said. Evidence is easy to fake. Character is harder. When someone spends their free time helping nonprofits protect domestic violence survivors, they're probably not selling client data for profit. We stayed in touch. She consulted me on cases involving technical evidence. I learned to spot fabricated logs, manipulated timestamps, planted data, helped her build cases against executives who thought they could outsmart investigators. I thought about Leonard sometimes. Sitting in a federal prison, his fortune seized, his reputation destroyed. He'd spent 2 years building wealth through betrayal. He'd spend the next 4 decades paying for it. But the clients he'd harmed weren't whole. The families whose data was sold still dealt with credit fraud, identity theft, financial ruin. Justice for him didn't equal restoration for them. That's what I thought about during my workshops now. Prevention wasn't just about security systems. It was about building cultures where betrayal became harder, where internal threats were recognized, where people like Leonard couldn't operate undetected for years. My relationship with my sister improved slowly. She apologized for distancing herself during the investigation. Said she'd been scared, confused, didn't know what to believe. I understood. The evidence against me had been convincing. That was the point. I didn't date for 18 months. Didn't trust myself to recognize red flags. Didn't want to build something with someone who might disappear when things got hard. Eventually, I met Rachel at a workshop. She worked for a youth homeless shelter. Stayed after to ask detailed questions about encryption. We talked for 3 hours about technology, about helping people, about building security that protected the vulnerable. She knew my story, had Googled me before the workshop, had read the articles about the false accusations and the exoneration. Must have been terrifying, she said. I nodded. The worst part wasn't the charges. It was watching everyone believe I'd done it, having evidence that said I was guilty even though I knew I wasn't. Rachel's expression was understanding. My brother went through something similar, different circumstances, but the presumption of guilt, the way people vanished, I saw what it did to him. We started dating carefully, building trust through time and consistency, no grand gestures, just showing up, being honest, letting her see all of it, the damaged parts and the healing parts. 3 years after my exoneration, Stratford Financial went bankrupt. The client data breach, the scandal, the lawsuits, it destroyed them. 200 employees lost their jobs. Some of them had known about Leonard's activities. Most hadn't. I thought about reaching out to my former colleagues, the ones who'd blocked me, who'd believed the accusations. I didn't. Some bridges, once burned, aren't worth rebuilding. The nonprofit I worked for expanded. We hired 2 more security specialists, started offering free consulting to organizations serving vulnerable populations. We protected 1,000 nonprofits across 3 states. My workshops reached 2,000 people. Agent Reeves and I presented together at conferences, the FBI agent and the falsely accused man. We talked about how cases go wrong, how evidence can deceive, how justice requires questioning assumptions. Audiences loved it. We became a strange kind of team. On the 5-year anniversary of my exoneration, I received an email from one of Stratford's former clients, an elderly woman who'd lost $30,000 to identity theft after Leonard sold her data. She'd spent 3 years rebuilding her credit, her savings, her sense of security. I read your articles, she wrote. I wanted you to know that what happened to you happened to me too. Not the accusations, but the system failing, the betrayal, the feeling that nobody would believe the truth. Thank you for not giving up. I printed that email, kept it in my office. On hard days when the memories came back sharp and bitter, I read it, reminded myself that surviving wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who'd been betrayed by someone in power, everyone who'd been scapegoated, everyone who'd had their life nearly destroyed by lies. Leonard Voss would die in prison. My name was cleared. The clients eventually recovered most of what they'd lost through lawsuits and restitution. Rachel and I got engaged. Agent Reeves was invited to the wedding. Life moved forward the way it does after trauma. Scarred but functioning, damaged but rebuilding. I still check my digital security obsessively, still document everything, still verify access logs and security protocols with paranoid precision. The experience changed me permanently, made me hypervigilant, made me unable to fully trust systems or authority. But it also made me better at my job, better at teaching, better at recognizing threats, better at helping people protect themselves from those who'd exploit them. The workshops continue. Every month, new organizations. New people learning how to secure their data, how to recognize manipulation, how to protect the vulnerable from predators who hide behind positions of power. Sometimes people ask if I've forgiven Leonard. I haven't. Forgiveness feels like something I might reach someday, but not today. Today I'm focused on prevention, on making sure the next person in his position gets caught faster, on teaching people to question, to verify, to document, on building systems that protect truth instead of power. Agent Reeves told me recently that my case changed how her division investigates corporate fraud. They look deeper now. Question clean evidence. Consider alternative theories. Check the character of accusers alongside the accused. You saved lives, she said, not just by teaching security, but by surviving, by fighting back, by proving that fighting back matters. I don't feel like I saved anyone. I feel like I got lucky. Lucky that Agent Reeves remembered me from a workshop. Lucky that Leonard kept evidence of his crimes. Lucky that the truth emerged before I spent years in prison for something I didn't do. But luck is part of survival. And survival, I've learned, is the foundation for everything else. The rest you build slowly, day by day, workshop by workshop, person by person, truth by truth. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.